Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And we have a really phenomenal guest here today. Hiba Jameel is a certified nutritionist, visual artist, analytical researcher, and program advocate with extensive experience blending analytical skills, understanding of nutrition and food policy, and a passion for improving people's lives through healthy eating. She is adept at customizing programs and strategies for each client and audience to transform their experiences while also aligning best practices with their unique lifestyles and needs. She graduated with a BS in biochem and cell biology from the University of California, San Diego, and has her master's in nutrition science and policy from Tufts University. In her art career, Hiba has received numerous awards for her civic art response to current political situations and has been written about in multiple newspapers, including our local paper, The Seattle Stranger. Hiba also worked closely with the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture in a 2-year community art therapy project called Psychosomatic. Her interactive show took place and was sponsored by Seattle Center. Hiba takes pride in her horizontal thinking and creativity to problem solving alongside with her research skills. She is bilingual in English and Arabic and committed to championing diversity and inclusion. Hiba, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be on your podcast.
Well, you have the work you're doing, first of all, is so incredible and balanced and broad, and yet still so focused on kind of some very specific themes that we'll talk about. But tell us how you came to this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, because you particularly have a really fascinating life story. Can you just tell us about yourself?
Well, I think my fascination with nutrition and health and art started at a very young age. With art, it started since I was 3. You could say I was pretty much born with the innate need for a creative outlet and constantly drawing. And I just was happy to take my time in honing and making a drawing look better. So that's for art. It started from a very young age. And then for nutrition and health in particular, it was more health. And then it was kind of the basic of health is what you put in your body and how you live your lifestyle. And I would say the trigger for that started when my maternal grandfather had a stroke, and it happened in front of me.
Oh my goodness.
I was about 8 years old. It was around the Gulf War, right after it actually. And he had a stroke and he had another stroke, and he was, he didn't take care of his health, and he was a chain smoker and he was diabetic. He wasn't overweight or anything. He was just under a lot of stress. The political situation was very bad at the time, and my uncle went missing. He worked for the government at the time.
In Iraq.
That's another in Iraq.
In Iraq. You were born and raised in Iraq.
I was born and raised I was born and raised there until I was 11, and then we left Baghdad when I was 11, and I've never been back since. Wow. I'm 39 now, so it's been ages. But that was that little bit that kind of ignited the question, well, why? Why did he get a stroke? What does a stroke mean? Why did he stop talking? Why is he paralyzed? Because he continued, he couldn't, his speech was shot from the stroke, so he couldn't talk. He could only say a few letters, and we would make out what he means by it. And half of his body was paralyzed. And so I loved my grandfather so much. And so that was such a big deal for me. And I kept on asking the question, why? And it was just kind of in the back of my head. And so anytime there's a television program that had a doctor on, or if I come across a magazine that had an article about health or nutrition, I would just read it. I would read it and I would be interested to learn, okay, when we eat the food, how do we actually use it for energy? What happens? How do you just ingest the food and then it becomes energy? And then throughout the years growing up, that led me to, okay, well, you need to study biochemistry to know how this happens. And so it was really a microscopic interest on how things, I wanted to zoom out and then zoom in on a cellular and, a chemical and atomic level on how things happen. And studying biochemistry and cell biology allowed me, I'm so grateful. It allowed me to do that zoom in and go at a microscopic level and even on an electron level to see how things actually happen. So when I talk about something, I know why it's happening, how it's broken down, etc. And then I went on after that. I did my master's in nutrition science, and it was just more, I think this was fueling my innate belief that what we eat really factors in and how we do our health. Okay, it's not 100% just what you eat. There are environmental and lifestyle factors. But I was interested mostly in food because I grew up in a culture and a household that values food so much. And so, even back when I was little, it was always, the vegetables, the herbs, the fruits. And then, it was interesting to see, a big spread of food change as we moved from Iraq, as we were immigrating, and we were in a transient between a few countries before we finally made it to the US, and how this food spread changed when we came to the US and how the culture affects that. Yeah.
Can you paint us that picture of that table? Can you tell us what some of the foods and the fruits or the spices?
So exactly. So I grew up in my grandparents' house. So I grew up with my uncles and aunts, and it was a big household. And so when we came together to eat breakfast and we came together to eat lunch and dinner, that was the norm, is that the whole family, and it's a big family, they have to all gather around the table and eat. And usually, it was very normal. We had a lot of herbs in our garden. We grew tomatoes. My grandparents' house, their garden was full of orange and lemon and bitter orange trees and different kind of berries, pomegranate, grapes. So I grew up literally just picking something and washing it and eating it, or sometimes not washing it, just eating it. And, climbing the mulberry tree and falling off it and eating them right from the tree. So all of that, it was in our house. And that was on the table. So we would have a lot of fruits daily, and our, spread was filled with lots of herbs, fresh herbs like parsley, basil, cilantro, chives. They just wash them and they put them, and then they make a salad, and then they have the stews and the rice and the bread, which is all fresh, all homemade. So every Friday we ate fish. They would bring really big grilled fish that were river fish from the Tigris or the Euphrates. I can't remember, but they would bring it from outside. This is something, it's a treat. It's a special thing. And they bring this, and then we'd have it with lots of vegetables and side dishes like rice or burgul. It's like cracked wheat. We ate a lot of bean stews. I think we ate stews very regularly, and things, we make a dish called dolma. That was also a special treat, but it's not the regular dolma. It's a Iraqi dolma. It's a big, big, big pot, and it's stuffed onions and tomatoes and potatoes and Swiss chard. And it's a different kind of breed of dolma. Very delicious, intensive work. But my mom, my grandma, my aunts, even my grandfather before he was ill, and my uncles, I feel like everybody took part in how we ate. This person would do the grocery shopping, and then they kind of grocery shopped every day. So every day, every morning they wake up, what are we going to eat today? So they have to go get the ingredients for that dish. And that was our daily routine. We had to do that every day. And that isn't as convenient in the modern times right now. But I remember that was a part of our day, is we go, we plan what to eat, we get the ingredients, and they spend a few hours making the food. And that was just normal. Everybody did that. And they attended to the garden. And, sometimes we pick the herbs from our own garden. We wash them and eat them, or we pick the grapes and we wash them and eat them in the afternoon. And, even during the sanctions, which were really tough on Iraq because there was just a lack of resources, we didn't have there was, for example, you couldn't go outside and buy candy. You couldn't go outside and buy cake. Nothing conventional, nothing imported. So they had to make everything from scratch at home. And meat, animal products, were really expensive, and eggs. So my grandma was really creative. She bought a lot of hens and she made the back of the house into a hen, and then we would just collect their eggs daily. And we had our eggs from our hens. And they just were produced. And, I was helping her. I was also, it was a fun game for me as a child to help her with the hens and chores, but it was fun. Yeah. So that was, me growing up around that, and being exposed to that, it kind of set the foundation of how nutrition and food is such a huge part of our daily life.
Mm-hmm.
And how, after all those years, and as I grew up and I became an adult and went to college and live in this very fast-paced, individualistic society,
Mm-hmm.
how a lot of these values, came apart. And it was interesting to see the family dynamic as well change to adapt to the new environment. So my grandmother, the same grandmother, lives in San Diego. I see her once in a blue moon, unfortunately. I don't go often. I don't go there that often. I live in Seattle. My other sister lives in a farther part in San Diego. My other sister lives in Europe. So yeah, we don't have that, coming together anymore. But I do believe that my grandmother, until this day, cooks daily and tries to get her ingredients daily. She doesn't have the luxury of having her own garden where she could, plant her things, unfortunately. And I don't think she has the energy for it either. But yeah, all of that changed. And, as we adapted and moved up here, which isn't necessarily bad. It's just different world. It's a different world. And so how do you reinstall that in your life? I can't bring my grandparents' house. They lived in a very large house that was 3 stories, huge front garden, huge backyard garden, and a garage and a high walls that was private. And it was also, I don't know, it wasn't a farmhouse. It was kind of a smaller farmhouse. I don't know how to describe it, but that's the system over there. They're kind of like villas.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Italian villas in a way.
Yeah.
And everybody was like this.
Yeah.
All our neighbors. We even grew bananas at one point.
Wow.
Yeah, they were like the mini bananas. So you can't do that here. And some people are fortunate to have a larger home with a garden where they could plant their garden and pick from it and eat. And that's wonderful. But for the average person who has to go to work and has a 9-hour shift, well, how do you do this? How do you plan this? And we have options, which is great right now. And, there are options for people who are health conscious and they want to eat healthy. And there's even, instead of getting fast food, I was reading online and I found this service where they deliver healthy food to your door.
Yep.
That you just microwave. So there are amazing options out there. It isn't ideal, but it's also better than a drive-in at a fast food chain. So even fast food chains now, they have healthier items on the menu. But if you're so hungry and you're getting in line for fast food, you're so hungry that you're in a fast food lane, the chances of you making a healthy choice are less. You're going to give in to the more delicious flavors and the smells because you came here because you were so hungry. So your neurology and your body is working against your decision making.
Right.
Where if you plan to eat and you eat regularly and your blood sugar levels are regular, then you're less likely to opt for or be weak to fall for that. So it's good. I think if you're in a group with people in a car and you're on a strict diet and they want to eat at this, fast food drive-through, that person has an option to pick something healthy. Yeah. But the odds of that happening compared with the amount of people who go there for convenience when they're very hungry is not as much. So it's good, but it's not so good.
Right.
But it's still good. Yeah.
Right.
So, so it all boils down to the individual, and how, the values they carry out in their day and where did these values come from? And going back to your question is that it started from an early age. I cared about art. That was an innate part of me. And, my inquisitive nature about health, because the people whom I love the most and cherish had, terrible health incidents and that I witnessed. And it started this endeavor in asking why, and looking at everything. So I studied what I studied for those specific reasons. And I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to have this education at some of the most, scientifically researched and advanced schools in the nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you had some really interestingly diverse experiences in terms of, your grandfather with his poor health, but also this really intact table of people and really good sources for nutrition, really healthy food and, it's certainly the way your joy is palpable in how you talk about how everybody sat around that table and contributed to the meal. And that really is a shift. And I think you hit the nail on the head about asking the question of how do we reinstate that togetherness around a table, that there's so much of our digestion that relies on the neurology of being safe and cared for when you're digesting that food. And so being able to be with people that you love, who love you, who are caring for you, who are paying you enough attention, that goes such a long way in terms of helping the digestion and enjoying the food. So what an interesting mix. And you came kind of out of this Gulf War as an 11-year-old. And, you and I have talked about kind of as a refugee and as an immigrant. And then when you did your master's work at Tufts, you really focused on blue zones, which are areas where people live very, very long, healthy lives. So can you talk to us a little bit about your thesis work and what you learned about blue zones and kind of what that juxtaposition has been like for you?
So just to backtrack a little bit, my interest in nutrition has been there since I was little, but it was intensified even more, especially with my thesis proposal by my late mother's illness. She had breast cancer. May God rest her soul in peace. She loved cooking and eating and all of that, but she wasn't really a believer in preventative. She just lived life at large, and she liked to cook and bake and eat everything. And we had this constant battle at home, always like, this is too much baking. It's too much ghee. And I was always the police. When she got diagnosed, I just, my research kicked in, my research abilities, and it was just reading. And then it was a coincidence, sort of around the same time I was trying to apply to grad school, and it just kind of it made sense at the time. And I'm so grateful for that, for everything that happened in my life, because it always fueled something so positive. And in this case, it was this. And so I started, and even with nutrition, nutrition is such a vast field that it really is so customizable, and no single statement applies to everyone. Even the word healthy could be so dangerous to throw around sometimes around, when you're labeling foods and healthy, what does that mean? What do you mean healthy? Because everything eventually gets broken down, right? And so I think healthy is thrown out around so much, but it is so transient, and it is so relative to where you put it and in what context and what the background is for that word healthy. If this dish or this particular food is healthy for you based on your goals and your existing health or pre-existing conditions. But this particular food might not be so healthy for this individual who has digestive issues or who's allergic to it. So, that's my beef with the word healthy. And there's so many other words in nutrition that, I just can't, I could talk for hours about how they are used and misused. So I, again, fueled by my inquisitive is actually ancient health. And it was also influenced by Dr. Gundry. He's a cardiovascular surgeon, I believe, in Palm Springs. But he has a background in evolutionary biology, and he wrote books about health and nutrition. And it was so fascinating, the theories he talked about in his book. But he definitely, kind of influenced a little bit of my interest about studying the blue zones and people who inhabited these areas. And I was interested in how did their blood work look on a molecular level, and, what markers were high or low, in those individuals who lived a really long life, above 100, healthfully, without any illnesses, who had communities and cooked their own food. And so it kind of a little bit goes back to how I grew up, where we cooked every day and we went and grocery shopped every day, fresh produce, and we picked from our garden. They kind of do that in all of these regions. They cook daily. Most of them, and if not all of them, are mainly plant-based. Not all of them are vegan. There's one area, Loma Linda in California, and I think they practice a religious, I forgot what the Seventh Advent, I forgot I can't recall, but they practice a faith, and in that faith, they can't eat any animal products. And I think they can't eat sugar and they can't consume caffeine, something like that. Mm-hmm. So they're the only group that I know 100%, they are 100% vegan. But the other, like, Okinawa, Ikara, South America, I think they eat animal products in a very small percentage, like maybe 20 to 10% from the entire, their entire nutrition ingestion of what they eat. So they eat mostly beans and lentils. They eat a lot of, fresh vegetables and whole grains. And they eat until they're 80% full. So they don't eat to maximum fullness. They consume a little bit of alcohol once or, 2 times a week. And it's just a small amount of alcohol. And it's interesting, the alcohol argument. And I was reading about that, and it activates hormosis. But this is not necessarily something that will happen to everybody. Given how they live their life and how they're not eating a lot of sugar and how their diet and lifestyle is for them, for this particular individual who lives this kind of lifestyle, they will benefit from that little hormosis that they get from the alcohol, which activates longevity genes for them. And then also, for example, in Ikara in Sicily, the wine has resveratrol. It's from the skin of the grapes. And that's why the wine is good for them, not because of the alcohol. It's because of the other benefits from the grapes. So, they don't have a glass of wine every day. They have it once or twice a week, and it's a very small amount. That's the average. I don't have exact numbers, but that's the average of how they consume alcohol in those regions. So yeah, that, those people live long because they don't have chronic illnesses. They don't have hypertension or heart disease or high levels of cholesterol, or they don't have precancerous growths. That's why they are living a long life. So that was the logic behind, okay, well, I want to focus on these individuals who managed to live longer life. And how did they do it? Well, they don't have chronic illnesses. Well, what would prevent chronic illnesses? What kind of nutritional habits, what kinds of foods, lifestyle changes that could help an individual to lower their, let's say, mTor and IGF-1 insulin-like growth hormones, right? So how do we, because these individuals have these 2 markers low, and they have been, shown in multiple studies that they are low in people who have a long lifespan. And there's other studies that, people who have sarcopenia, they have
muscle
low,
loss. So
loss muscle.
Sarcopenia is muscle degeneration,
muscle, and they have lower mTOR. So then there's this like dance. Well, we need to have higher mTOR for this, but then, so that boils down to goals, right? And it boils down to pre-existing health. And how, nutrition goals will change as you age, and in every different stage of your life, your nutritional needs and health will change. So if you're younger and you're in high school and you're on the swim team, or you're on some team, your nutrition and your consumption of certain calories and macronutrients will be different than someone who is in their late 40s into their 50s. And this is where things start to get interesting, and people will start to get it's the start of chronic illnesses, right? And in the book by Dr. Gundry, he talks about an interesting theory, evolutionary theory, where, if the body or your genetic makeup will sense that you're not a good fit and you might be competing with your progeny, it will activate killer genes, and then
oh my god,
all of these things will start to happen. It's just it's a theory. He talks about it in his book, but regardless of whether we believe in that or not, the reality of the situation is, most people start to have the onset of their chronic illnesses happen around that age, if not younger, if they are on a very unhealthy lifestyle. So the nutritional needs for someone who's aiming for longevity and reversal or stopping the onset of chronic illnesses will be different than the young person who's competing in a sport, different than someone who wants to lose fat, will be different for someone who's diabetic, will be different for someone who has digestive issues and maybe have some deficiencies caused by their digestive issues. So all these individuals have different nutritional needs, and what's healthy for one person is not necessarily healthy for the other, because, like I said, healthy describes it's a transient term, depending on where you put it.
And so how do you work with patients? Like, what is the process for a person to come to you for nutritional support, for nutritional advice, for evaluation and treatment? What does that process look like to work with you?
It is very individualistic. Every person has to have a customizable plan for them, something that works for them, that is easier for them to adhere to. We will talk about behavioral changes. I am not a huge fan of introducing major changes all at once. I think you need to introduce one thing at a time. So, it's customizable depending on their goals. And we would talk about if their goals are realistic or not. We would talk about their background, their health, habits, budgets, environments, where is the temptation. Talk about their health. If you're just losing weight just so you can binge drink, or if you're losing weight just for vanity, or, if a certain diet plan works for you, or if you followed fad diets. And it's a very flexible way of dealing with the client and setting realistic expectations for the person in front of me. And talking about risks of, doing things too fast and how that could affect your biochemistry and how it could affect your, basal metabolic rate, and how instead of you becoming a burning fat machine, your body would get hurt from crash dieting. So it's a very customizable thing. I don't believe in the one size fits all. There are certain things that are scientifically proven and we know they are accurate, which is, for example, for weight loss, it's energy in versus energy out. So there is, it doesn't matter what you follow or which food group you cut out or not cut out or include. At the end of the day, weight loss happens, how you spend energy and how you consume energy. So if you eat a lot of calories and you don't move a lot and you don't burn a lot, you're going to gain weight. If you eat the right amount of calories for weight loss that don't harm your organs and your body, then you will lose weight at a steady rate, going down a zigzag line. So if you're a fan of weighing yourself daily, expect some days that number will go up, some days the number will go down, but it should go in a downward trend.
This is such an interesting conversation to talk about because we definitely see that some patients with immune dysfunction will do different things with their calories, so that some calories taken in can change how they get processed by what the immune system is doing. So if the immune system or the basal metabolic rate has shifted, then sometimes the calories are moved through quickly, and then sometimes they stick based on kind of the inflammation level of the body. It's such an interesting thing because there's so much, this black box. I mean, it's exactly what you're saying about customizing, because every person is so different. And so we have such a unique makeup inside of us. In our experience at our clinic, having something coming into one person versus something coming into another person, the body can respond so differently because in this black box of unique metabolic magic, there's different things can happen. It's so interesting.
Absolutely.
So interesting.
And if somebody is ill, for example, I would not have them on like a restriction. I would be like, just get healthy. Because if you have a lot of inflammation and you're sick and you have the flu or you have COVID or something, you should not be trying to limit calories. You should be trying to eat good, nutritious food and getting healthy again. And, bringing that, because if you're sick, your inflammation, your body is responding and you have a lot of inflammation. But, more to that point is that, certain foods can raise, inflammation in the body, and certain foods can lower it. And depending on, let's say somebody who has an autoimmune disorder, how, eating an anti-inflammatory diet can help reduce the symptoms of their autoimmune disorder, or sometimes even remove 100%. There's various studies that have shown that, and various individuals who have talked about that openly, like, hey, I followed an anti-inflammatory diet and my IBS had almost diminished, or, this skin condition that I have had almost gone to non-existing. And it's all about choices at the end.
And we know
our priorities.
Priorities and opportunities, right? And I know that this has been big for you as well with you, because your nutrition from your master's in nutrition is not just about nutrition, but also about food policy. And so, so many of our choices really come out of what opportunities are available to us. If we have, I know from my own life that when I've been working 60-hour work weeks, my nutrition, my ability to cook a 2-hour meal just really tanks. And so talk to us a little bit about this broader picture of nutrition in terms of like what is included in food policy and what are some of the policies that we should look for and seek and support in order to help our population be healthy from a nutrition perspective?
Yeah. So the dean of the nutrition school at Tufts University, his name is Dr. Muzaffarian. I think just a few days ago, he spoke before a United States Senate committee in support of a bipartisan bill to convene a second national White House conference on food, nutrition, hunger, and health. Ooh. Of course, he talked about a lot of stuff, but the most important thing I would say, in my opinion, that he mentioned is how, we are on a path to disaster. We have to get, healthcare costs under control and we're not going to be able to do that unless we address the top cause, which is poor nutrition. And in order for you to address poor nutrition, and especially in underprivileged, societies, there needs to be more nutrition funding for studies, for nutrition studies, and for the programs, nutrition programs for the underprivileged societies and underprivileged areas in our communities. For example, he mentioned that 1 out of every 2 American adults is diabetic or pre-diabetic, and 3 in 4 struggle with obesity or are overweight. These and other diet-related health conditions disproportionately impact vulnerable populations such as ethnic minorities and those living in rural areas. And the people affected are 12 times more likely to die after being infected by COVID. So it's a public health crisis, and it's also, he's saying it's also a government spending crisis. Direct healthcare spending on diabetes alone has ballooned to more than the entire budget of the United States Department of Agriculture.
Oh my goodness.
So it is also a national security issue. 3 out of 4 young Americans are ineligible to serve in the military, with the top medical reason being obesity.
Wow. Wow.
And it's a major problem for our economy, with 1.1 trillion lost each year in healthcare spending and decreased productivity due to diet-related diseases.
Isn't that unbelievable?
So, that's policy for you, right? So, as much as we talk about the individual choices that we make, there are things outside of our own that sometimes we can't control. If you happen to live in a rural area, you probably won't get a lot of access to organic produce. And it wouldn't be as convenient for you if you have this one grocery store. It wouldn't be as convenient for you to have your job and be able to go to that store to get access to organic produce. So that's just a small example.
Or just access to produce. I mean, there's so many areas that are food deserts where like a convenience store is where people buy their food.
Absolutely.
And not a lot of fresh. I mean, our corner convenience store sells fruit. You can get cut fruit, avocados, lemons, limes, bananas, and apples. And then like cheese sticks and egg salad and, so like if that was the only place we could shop, and here in Seattle, in the heart of the city, we have so many options. I've got like Whole Foods and PCC, as well as multiple other grocery stores, but, 2 health grocery stores, within 2 miles of me or 3 miles, something like that. So it's, but there are these food deserts. You're exactly right. And then our health policies really need to shift to be able to support
more on prevention, and, studying how we could do that and implement that more than spending on treatment.
Right.
And that has always been, I think, in terms of policy, and I believe a lot of healthcare professionals advocate for that, is let's spend more on prevention. Let's focus more on prevention versus just treatment. And, hopefully one day our voices will be heard and things will just shift permanently in that direction. But for the time being, we are on a path to disaster.
Yeah. We're trying for an uplifting podcast here.
Unfortunately, that's the don't quote
this
me.
Is
the dean of the nutrition school at
yes. Well,
Tufts
but you're
University,
absolutely right.
And he's speaking to the Senate, so he's trying to get their attention. And there's, you have to be, hey, look at me. This is a disaster. Like I need support, So I understand where that, emotional, but, regardless of what the policy is and what the policy is, what we can do as individuals, it also boils down to the people you elect, right? To who you support. And if they do support these things or not. So being well educated on the people that we put in office and their background and the things they promise us is very important. And I think, that's part of the democratic election system that we have here is we need to, as individuals, put time aside to do a little bit of research on the individuals who make big decisions in our policy and lawmaking and how this country is run.
Yeah.
That's the least we could do. But, regardless of that, we have to think about our holistic life, like our life as a whole. What are the priorities? What comes first? What comes second? And I think looking at those priorities every once in a while and reminding yourself, it's not just, you could get anxiety about paying your bills and doing this, but also if you don't have your health, you won't be able to do any of these things.
Mm-hmm.
So we go back to the vehicle that's driving all these things, the driving force in our life. And, also health is not just nutrition. And a lot of the people I have seen, I have actually almost all of them, I've talked to them about meditation, lowering their stress levels, exercise and movement habits. I have advised certain individuals to get a standing desk.
Yeah.
I have advised and coached certain individuals on and provided them with resources on meditation and how they get started with guided meditation. In the beginning, I've talked about, psychological things that could have happened, or conditions that you might have that might be driving this, how much sleep you're getting.
Yeah.
And also hormones, what other medications you're on. How is your, are you on birth control? And what is that doing to your cravings? And how could we control those cravings? What's your environment like? Are your family members in support of your goals? Can you clean up your environment? And by that, I mean your kitchen environment, your house environment. Are you walking and there's donuts on the counter in your kitchen? Or are you walking and there are vegetables, right? So that's the environment, the nutrition environment that you need to be aware of. So one of the first things I tackle is that. What's your environment like? So don't buy unhealthy foods home. If you must get some treat, then you would have to go drive to get it. And you get just one for one time. But it's not something that you want to stock up from Costco in your freezer. Don't make it easy. Don't make it convenient. Make it difficult. And even buying a lot of it and storing it in the top cupboard, well, you can reach the top cupboard.
Yes.
And if you have 10 in there, what would prevent you from grabbing 5 at a time? Like, and if someone has a binge eating disorder, it's like, having drugs around. Like, so you, for that person, there is also certain kind of therapy that they have to do. And there's behavioral therapy, theories that we have to implement and setting realistic expectations that you're going to do a behavior change, not just an eating change and it's also thinking about, I'm eating to fuel my body. I'm not just eating for pleasure.
And there's so much of our eating choices, our nutrition choices that we make around stress and safety or threat. And so being able to feel safe in our lives and fulfilled and to lower our stress is one of the ways.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to mention this. There's an interesting study about how people who watch horror movies snack more on unhealthy options than people who watch a comedy or just like a normal show. And it's so funny because I like horror movies and I'm usually sitting with my popcorn and stuffing my face. So, it's so interesting, but it's so true because it provides that comfort, right?
Yes. That is so interesting. That's hilarious.
It's a good way to make money in those theaters, right?
Yes, make the horror movies, sell the popcorn. So much of our safety is not only kind of our environment, but also are we expressing who we are? Are we living our dharma? Are we doing what we're here to do? And it makes me, I just keep coming full circle back to like the incredible mix that you are with your nutrition, but also with your art. And so I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about the role of art in healing and kind of the relationship inside of you between your art and your nutrition and food and science and policy work. Like, how do those come together in the single person that is you?
A very interesting mix, but it does really come together. So, so policy, aside from food policy, is just like, being someone who was born in Iraq and who lived under a tyrant. Pretty much Saddam Hussein's regime was very an oppressive regime. And, we were every single morning, we'd stand at 7 a.m. in the school playground, standing like, military style and chanting things, praising him.
Wow.
That was a very oppressive regime, authoritarian. It was literally shoved down our throats, where we had to praise this king of a president every single morning. And the walls had ears, and you could never criticize the government. You could never speak up. You could never say anything. The only thing you can say is praise and obey. Keep your head down, walk by the wall, don't make any noise. So as a child, that left something inside of me. So, fast forward years and years, decades later, I'm here in the US. And then, it was under the previous administration when the zero tolerance policy upheaval happened. And, I was so moved by it because I remember certain memories from my life, for example, in the midst of sanctions, the economical sanctions in Iraq, where the nation was starved and people were hungry, we would have to sit and watch national television display the birthday celebration of our president and him celebrating lavishly and eating lots of cake and delicious food.
Wow.
And we're paying, the people are paying the price for his erratic behavior and him invading Kuwait. And so that was just so messed up to witness. So when this happened and I saw how the kids were being taken away and putting in a detention camp at the border, oh my gosh, I was just so moved by that. And, my daughter at the time was about 3 and I was just like boiling on the inside. What if this was me? What if, I was fortunate enough to arrive here legally as a political refugee back in 98. But these people, nobody would put their child on a boat unless the water was safer than the land. So these people came to the border and doing this because they're in dire situation.
Yeah.
And then, the kids, the only security blanket they have is their parents.
Right.
So, right at the border, you take away the safety from them and then you put them in this detention center. And there was all these articles about kids being molested and mistreated. And there is nobody was monitoring this the right way.
Yep.
And so that happened. And then the Time magazine cover came out, where they photoshopped, the previous president with the little child. It was just heartbreaking. So I reappropriated that image into a painting that I had already started about the Gulf War that I had called The Gulf War Was a Piece of Cake. And then that painting morphed into I Really Don't Care, Do You? In quotation marks. It became this painting. And that's the one that the stranger wrote about because it was, it happened in a very timely manner in response to the situation that happened. I think it was in July of 2017, I think. And basically, it was a comparison between when you act like a tyrant and you are a tyrant and you're in an author, in this kind of, I don't know, what do you call it? Like the administration and the way they were behaving, it was more authoritarian than it was a democratic thing. And so I was trying to kind of draw a parallel between my experience as a child, which everybody got affected, but kids got affected the most. These things they become part of your neurobiology in your brain, and you have the state ingrained with the sounds of bombs and, the starvation that you put them through. We didn't know what strawberries or apples tasted like until we left the country because those things were so expensive to import, right? Wow. So it was just some basic things that people here take for granted that we were deprived of. So the children got affected back then. And now, because of all the political stuff and because of what President Trump was doing, the children got affected the most. So I drew that parallel, and speaking out about how, as a global society, we got so numb to seeing children being the victim of political decisions. Yes. And they're just children. They didn't ask to be born. They just came to this life, and they're innocent souls that we are torturing. And, around the same time, it was, the Syrian refugee crisis and the little child who was washed on the shore and the other child who was found under the rebels in Syria. So it was just, the other layer was just talking about how we got used to seeing children in bloody situation. Mm-hmm. We see it in the news and we're immune to that, humanitarian response that, wait a minute, those are kids. Mm-hmm. And so that was, me responding to policy, let's say, in a way that is artistic and it is not related to nutrition. So art has been a healing method for me. And I didn't know I was doing that. It was, it was how I coped with my emotions. I had to internalize a lot of emotions. War trauma, for example, I had to internalize that. I remember, I was making sculpture out of shrapnel in front of our house. And I was thinking, well, this thing that fell behind our house, I think it was like a half a faulty missile that exploded in the air and half of it fell behind our house. And it left a huge dent on the street. And I remember thinking, well, that could have fallen on our house and it could have been us because it was just so close. And every morning I'd wake up to the smoke smell. And I mean, our morning was kind of interesting because they would bomb at night. Like the bombing would start like at night. So we were up most of the night just hearing bombs go off. So every time there is the 4th of July celebration, everybody is enjoying it. And I'm just like, please God, let it be over. I don't want to hear those sounds. They remind me of the sounds when I was a child. Yeah. And so art was a mechanism of coping and it was a talent. And I unknowingly channeled, that talent and this ability to cope with all the emotions I had inside. And so, aside from right now, I'm not necessarily painting from my wounds as I used to be before. Now art and painting and visual art became more of just another endeavor to make this world better. But it's not necessarily just a coping mechanism. But I do love teaching people how they can use it to cope. Yeah. So I did that, when I collaborated with the Office of Arts and Culture. And before that, I had collaborated with, I think it's a small office here that is called Art with Heart, where they take children and teenagers from abusive homes and they teach them how to do art for healing. And I had collaborated with them in the Seattle Center. And then I did a small project that was community-based called Shades of Emotions. And it was about people, picking colors from painted canvas and placing it on the canvas where they felt the emotion the most. So yellow is anxiety. So they take it and they put it on the flower that was painted yellow. Say, okay, I mostly felt anxious these days. So I'll take these colors, put them on the yellow. Or felt loving. And then, so at the end, we had this painting that was kind of a poll of how people felt. So that was one. And then after that, I did a bigger project with the Office of Arts and Culture where they sponsored me for 2 years. And it was called Psychosomatic. And I was teaching people about what psychosomatic is, which is, if you get anxious and you feel a certain way, it could manifest in your physical body and how you feel. You might get a headache or a stomach ache or, some autoimmune thing flares up due to stress. So I would explain that to people. And then I would, help them, teach them how they could paint their psychosomatic experience on a painting I already had that was pre-made. And they could, for example, someone would say, okay, well, when I get anxious, I get a stomach pain. So they would paint on the stomach of one of the paintings of the figures they choose. And so that went on for 2 years and I loved it. I mean, it happened. I would do it on May, which was Mental Health Awareness Month. So we did it in May of 2018 and 2019. And it happened in Seattle Center. There was a gallery there. So, it was even advertised on their digital, the screen that they had on the road. It was really rewarding. It was very rewarding to see people, go back and come, go and the paintings were for sale. So they would go and they come back days later. Oh, I want to buy this. I painted on it. But also I went home and I thought about all the things, we talked about in terms of psychosomatic and mental health. And, thank you. I actually picked up a set of acrylics and I'm going to start painting, just as fun to do. So it's also to encourage people to pursue art just for the sake of enjoyment and not necessarily to sell a painting, not necessarily to be the best artist in the world, but just because you enjoy it. And we don't have enough advocating for the arts in our policy and in our world. And, especially everyone is focused on money, money, money. And then, well, if you tell them you're an artist, well, how much money do you make? Or how are you surviving? Those are the kinds of questions some artists get. And it's unfortunate. And artists do have to struggle financially sometimes, but they don't think like that. They think differently about art. It's more like a life calling. It's a mission. If they don't do it, they will be very sad. And if they do it, it's not easy. It's hard work. But that's for professional artists. Now, the individual person, would benefit greatly from an artistic outlet, whether be it attending symphony or live music or trying to play an instrument or picking up sewing or picking up knitting or doing a little bit of, mobile. They have these like really cute little watercolor kits that you could buy. You could just stick it in your purse and, or you could take an art class. Yeah. And it's just for fun. It doesn't have to be for anything. And that a lot of studies had shown that art does play a role in reducing anxiety and working through your emotions. And it's kind of like venting on a journal, or you could also be listening to nice music and just painting, feeling that you could channel those feelings into something. It's sort of what I did growing up. And I didn't know I was doing that until I became an adult. And then I realized, that's what I've been doing. But it's more than that for me. I have literally half my brain functions like a scientist and the other half functions like an artist. And I have my own artistic methods of what I do to get, to start painting. And it's a very different world from the scientific analytical world. I just check out with that one and I start with this one. And, I've managed to come to this and I've managed to love my brain the way it is. I recently found out I have ADHD and I did a lot of diagnostic testing with 2 different individuals to confirm it because I didn't want to just accept one opinion like I always do. I just went in and then I was like, yep, you're the poster child for ADD. But it's interesting because, I have ADD or I have ADHD. I had no idea. I only found out 2 months ago. And I've been coping with it my whole life. And I've developed all these methods to cope with it. The only thing I couldn't, fix on my own was the being late all the time. That and after I found out and after going to therapy, it was just not. He just told me, he said, it's just not in your hand. It's like there's that part in the middle that just doesn't connect, and it was just like, wow. So now I have 2 reminders to everything, and just knowing the diagnosis helps you cope better with it, even if you don't necessarily take the treatment.
Oh, that is fascinating. It's amazing to hear you talk about both the food and the nutrition and then the policy and then your background and then the role of art. For longtime listeners, they know that every time we have this podcast, we start it with, we talk about everything that can heal your neurology, which is really everything. And you are the classic Renaissance woman who's doing all these multiple things with these different sides of your brain. So your specialty is really being able to kind of dance back and forth between both the art part that heals your neurology. And you've made that so clear, especially in terms of your old trauma and your experience in your life, in your childhood. But then also, you paint that table of your childhood so vividly in how you describe it. And so your food world is also so rich and with depth and breadth. And then I can see now, when you and I had first started talking and you were talking about growing up during the Gulf War with the bombs, there was so much loss and limitation in terms of the embargo, things that you didn't have. And so it was so fascinating to me that your focus went to the blue zones. But I can see how this is kind of figuring out, how do you make it so that you do have it all? How do you make the choices? How do you put yourself into the position so that you can grow old gracefully and with your health intact. So many of us in the US right now, so many of us with Western lifestyles around the world, our lives are longer, but our quality can be very poor. The last 20 to 30 years, many people are very sick and they stay sick. So there's you are alive, but you're not necessarily doing the things that you want to do with your life, like your grandfather. And so those blue zones are those areas where people live so long with higher quality and capacity, with higher functionality. And so what a gift you bring to the table. God, look at all these food analogies.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's
with the art and the nutrition piece. Yeah.
Absolutely. But, with nutrition and with health, it boils down to the question of what your priority is right now. If you're, in a war zone, your priorities are so much different than someone who lives, in a very stable nation, that you don't have to worry about your first line of safety. Yeah, there's scarcity that where I grew up, but also I did see how they coped with it. And it was pretty impressive. My grandmother dried her own tomatoes, made her own tomato paste. They made orange juice concentrate, lemon concentrate. They made their own fruit preserves. And it was such a joy. It wasn't looked at as a chore. It was interesting because, they would have the TV on, and then my aunts and the neighbors would come over, and then my grandmother, and then they're making all these things, and they're jamming, and they're packing. And I was just a kid playing around. We had a puppy, and I was just like going in and I'll do this and bring this. But now when I recall that time, it was just so interesting to see how they were so creative in finding solutions in a very limiting environment. And, in Middle East and even in Syria and in other nations, and I'm pretty sure in other parts of the world too, but I don't have the proper knowledge to speak of other nations, but they've developed over the years habits, because of the political unrest or because of the famines that they've experienced. They've developed recipes, ways of living, habits, and certain kinds of foods that kept them going with energy and everything. They weren't expensive foods, right? So farmers live longer, even though they were poorer and they eat mostly vegetables and grains, but they live longer. And it's not because of what they eat. It's also because, they farmed every day and they were getting sun and fresh air and being outdoors and moving their bodies in a certain way that was genetically preferred to keep them live long, right? And they weren't consuming a lot of energy that was beyond what they were expending, right? So they were balanced just the right way, and they were doing it unknowingly. It's just the culture of being a farmer. And they're not exposing themselves to a lot of pollutants, not even light pollution, right? So there were some studies that were done, I think, by the University of Tel Aviv about, women and breast cancer, and comparing women who lived, in rural areas versus women who lived in the city, and how light pollution played a role, because people who lived in the farm, they didn't, they slept with sunset and woke up with sunrise, and they didn't have to deal with blue light or cell phones. They just went to sleep because it's pitch dark. So their pineal gland was producing, was not disturbed, was regulated, was producing regular, consistent amounts of melatonin. We know it's a hormone, but it's an antioxidant. So, it would go on at night. And I imagine, my own description is that it's going and correcting everything as they sleep and rest, right? Where people who live in the city, okay, tonight we'll stay a bit longer, we'll watch a movie, they'll be scrolling on their phone and, in their bed. So, even if they close the blinds, or even if they don't, there's lights from the streets. So there's light pollution, and the pineal gland would only work in pitch darkness. And so, yes, technology and companies have reacted to that. They made that, the dim option on the phone where it's not. Right. They also sell these blue light blocking glasses that you can Amazon. People have to remember all these little things, Right. Sometimes you think, how much do we need to remember the changes we need to make, or how much, we want to take ourselves and live in an environment that is more, health friendly. And what are our risk factors? Now we have all this genetic testing being done. So it's good to know. It's good to know what your odds are and how what you can do on a day-to-day level to help prevent that from happening. Absolutely. But even if the odds did happen and something, God forbid, happened to someone, they would say, well, I did my best. I did everything I could. And,
Yep.
You wouldn't go back and say, oh, I should have done this, or I should have taken care more, more of my health.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to try to look at everything and see what you can do for yourself.
So any last thoughts you'd like to share with our audience today? We've really covered a wide range. And thank you so much for sharing your story with us and what you're doing and kind of how you see patients. It's awesome to hear.
Absolutely. Health, your health should be a priority because it impacts your relationships. It impacts your work. It impacts your goals and your future. And making that a priority, being able to address this priority in America, is a luxury that many people in other countries don't have. We are living in a safe environment, and there's a lot of things that are put in place that we can use to help us, make our life better. But then we need to go back to the question of, is health really my health? Is my health really my priority? And what am I doing about it?
Yeah.
And so allocating, your spending and thinking about that and how far you go with that and advocating for your health. That's part of making health your priority. And advocating for that is by, maybe spending a little bit more on good groceries and produce that are, local or organic, whatever, however, which side you're on. I advocate for local more than organic. And fresh versus, if you want to spend more on partying and drinking. So it's a balancing act.
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful to be on this show, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate it. And it was a true pleasure talking about all these things.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. You're so open with your honesty. You're such an authentic person. So we really appreciate it. And thank you, our listeners. Thank you for listening today with Hiba Jameel. We've got lots of ways to continue this conversation through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And you can get more information from and about us at our website, centerforhealingneurology.com. Please be sure to share this show with your friends. We welcome your rating and reviews wherever you get your podcasts. And feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, and we're committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Partyfish Media. Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org.